What's up, everybody? It is Jordan here from Wednesday Night Warhammer. We got another Tyranid Tactics video, and today we're looking at the scoring bugs. Yep, the bugs whose main job it may be to go and push a button and then immediately die, but they're still near and dear to our heart and very important for our army. Let's take a look. In the number 5 slot today, we've got Raveners. This is a unit that honestly throughout the entire edition has just steadily increased in my opinion on how good they are, and they're just very good. And I almost always include at least a squad of 3 in most of my lists that I run now currently. Especially since in Pariah Nexus, Spore Mines aren't able to do actions anymore. I feel like I've kind of pivoted to Raveners, filling that slot of a mobile action doer in places that normally you units would not be able to be. But let's talk about specifically what they kind of do, and then in the next slide, I'm going to go dive in depth on some tactics that I use for Raveners to show you how they move about the board and such. But really, they're the only source of free uppy downy in Tyranids. And if you're not familiar with the term uppy downy, that means at the end of your opponent's, sometimes it's fight phase, but essentially at the end of your opponent's turn, if your unit is not in engagement range, you can put that unit back into strategic reserves or deep strike, allowing you to reposition pretty much all of the time. And it's very useful to score secondaries or kind of move your forces around the table in a way that they normally would not be able to be. It's pretty good. In addition, they're very fast. They have a 10-inch movement. You know, if they are close to where they need to be in your opponent's end of your opponent's turn, then you can just leave them there and then move them 10 inches and get somebody, which is, I mean, 10 inches is pretty fast. It's not gargoyle speed, but it's pretty good. If 21 attacks for a 3-man squad that hit on 3s and get them to strength 6 easy while being in synapse, with AP 1 damage. Twin linked is kind of nuts for 75 points if you think about it. It's just a bucket of dice, and they do a really good job of just punching above their weight class, in my opinion. And they you know, they've always surprised me when going into Space Marine Scouts or anything like that. And skirmishing units that you're really needing to take care of, they normally can get the job done. And this last bullet point is free deployment fodder. I'm going to talk about it in a second, but when I'm deploying my armies, I oftentimes like to deploy at least 3 units that don't really matter where they go first, so that I get a little bit more of a picture of my opponent's game plan by seeing their first 3 drops of what they're doing first. I hope that makes sense, but I'll do like a Biovore, then Raveners, and I just put the Raveners behind the Biovore. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. And then I'll do like a Neurotyrant or something. But basically, the reason why they're a free deployment slot is because you're just going to uppy downy them and change where they go regardless. So, yeah. All right. So a little bit more strategies for how to use these snaky boys a little bit better and a little bit more efficiently. I have a map here, but I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But just a couple first bullet points we're going to talk about, just rule of thumb, is try to uppy downy almost every single turn. And that's something I do in gameplay, not to like cheese or anything, but you know, if you're playing a game, you're going to forget things. And I often tell my opponent, I say, hey, the standard is I'm going to pick up my Raveners every single turn. And I do that so before I draw secondaries, my opponent and I, we both know that, okay, these Raveners should be in the sky, or rather in the ground. And something to help you with that too is put like a poker chip or something on top of your secondary deck so that you know before you draw your secondaries, ooh, check my Raveners. Did I actually want to pick them up this turn, or do I want to leave them there so they can move and get a charge? Cool. So that's just a little uppy downy talk. Next, if there's no secondary and they are in deep strike, just put them back down where they are. Make sure you're screening out your back corner. You can see the Ravener in the bottom left of this deployment map. That's kind of shoring up that your Biovore is on your home objective, and then your Ravener can be behind it, making sure that there's a 9-inch bubble of nobody can do anywhere. And then each turn, if your Raveners don't really need to do anything, you don't need to screen your backfield, you can move them and redeploy them a little bit closer. So you see that second Ravener that's a little bit closer up. That would be trying to get a little bit more of a vantage point and kind of de-incentivizing your opponent to get closer to you unless they want to get Ravenered. Then another thing is you can do with the Raveners, you can bait charges for the rest of your army to get angles on your opponent's army. So if you just throw your Ravener out somewhere to maybe, I don't know, move block or just be annoying to your opponent, then your opponent is going to have to send something over there to kill your Raveners. And then if you are able to do so in a way which is allowing the rest of your army to get an angle on that counterpunch unit that your opponent sent out, then you can probably trade your Raveners for maybe a more valuable piece in the game. Um, Another thing that I want to talk about is the objective in the top left of this map. Oftentimes, especially in search and destroy, that objective that I have will first be holding out on a Lictor because it's lone op. You can just sit there and he's pretty much untouchable. You put a Lictor there, but then sometimes your Lictor needs to go out and get some business done. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's a good opportunity to deep strike your Raveners just back onto the point, and that allows whatever unit that was staged on that objective marker to move out, and you're not really having to commit any resources to that objective marker besides your Ravener uppy downy. So just a thought. And then the last bullet point is talking about the scout squad there at the bottom that's about to get wrecked by some Raveners. You can uppy downy in your opponent's turn, and then if your opponent is doing kind of what I said with the Lictor, with only dedicating just so much to that objective marker, then on a map like Search and Destroy, you can definitely rapid ingress your Raveners behind just a scout unit or something that is merely there to hold an objective, and then during your turn, they're going to have a problem with their Raveners coming in and probably clearing off that objective. In our number 4 slot, we got the Neurolictor. And honestly, the Neurolictor has it was crazy to start. It was such a good unit. And then with all of the points increases, I feel like the Neurolictor has kind of fallen off. But I do think that the Neurolictor is probably one of our best scoring units as well. But it's kind of for the mind games it can play. And we'll talk about that specifically in the next slide that we got. But just as a blanket covering these noodly boys, they infiltrate, which is an incredibly powerful ability. If you're not including infiltrators in your list, I highly encourage you to do so. They offer a selection of primary denial with the battle shock mechanic that they have in your command phase, making it easier to flip objectives or make the OC math a little bit more difficult on your opponent, which is incredible. They do a wonderful job of +1 to wound anything that's battle shocked. And Tyranids, we can lean into that battle shock mechanic a little bit better than I think a lot of armies can do, just because of our army rule. And the Neurolictor making benefits off of that can be incredibly powerful. The Neurolictor is surprisingly durable. So this is a unit that you could probably go out and do containment or cleanse or something like that. And maybe put it in a vantage point where it's not nearly as hidden as you would like, but honestly, with stealth and then the Forp Invuln and the surprising toughness T6 and 7 wounds, I believe, can definitely make it a hard breaking point for your opponents, because 2 damage weapons, you're going to have 4 that go through, and then D6 damage weapons you're going to have 2 that go through, essentially 2. So I think 7 wounds is a pretty good breaking point for them, which makes them really surprisingly durable. I've had many opponents been like, really? He has that many wounds? Or he has a 4 pinball or something like that. And then the last bullet point is something that we're really going to talk about in the next slide with another deployment map, is the threat of activation with the Neurolictor's Battle Shock ability is often more powerful than the actual activation of that Battle Shock. And when I'm talking about threat of activation, that's when it's basically the threat of an ability going off for your opponent. So you telling your opponent, hey, if you're within 12 inches of this Neurolictor, you're going to have to take a battle shock in my command phase. Just saying that alone can often freeze your opponent in their tracks and make them maybe make a decision that isn't best to their advantage, which when in the reality, there's a pretty strong chance that they just succeed their battle shock check anyways. All right, let's look at it. All right, so here it is, the mind games of the Neurolictor. It's got a weird blue mind, and it's doing weird mind game things to your opponent. So you can, quote unquote, control the objective 12 inches away. Not control an objective in a way where you are actually putting OC on the point and you are scoring it, obviously with primary. But you can, when you're deploying, because you're infiltrating, oftentimes you can just say, I'm going to put my Neurolictor here, and then you can put it in a way where its 12-inch Battle Shock aura is completely covering that objective. Do your best to try and make it so that it's still within terrain, but if you do that and you tell your opponent, hey, if you're on this objective, you're going to have to take a Battle Shock check. Honestly, some opponents are going to be like, ooh, that's not pretty good. And they're either going to do two things. They're going to do one thing where they don't put anything on that objective because they see that it might be just a wasted unit, or they're going to overcommit to that objective and put 2 units on the objective because you can only trigger 1 Battle Shock. Either of those scenarios I think are really, really good because the first one, your opponent's not scoring primary on that objective, which is amazing. That's incredible. Whatever. But the second one, I honestly think is often better times for us as Tyranids, is if they're overcommitting to an objective, then we are able to kind of control where we're putting our forces, and we don't have to spread out so thin, and we can kind of dedicate a good portion of our army to that objective because we're going to be getting 2 units off that objective if we are able to clear it off. So kind of cool. The +1 to wound is pretty nice. That and it doesn't always happen. Oftentimes it will happen during your Shadow's turn. But other than that, just reminding your opponent, this is kind of mean, but just reminding your opponent and telling your opponent, hey, if you're close to the Neurolictor, I'm going to Battle Shock you. And then you're going to get +1 to wound and your -1 to be hit. That's a lot of stuff that, opponents want to stay away from. So see if you can play it that way, and while you're doing all of this, you can also be scoring cleanse by being out there in the open with the Neurolictor, especially the lone op, containment, engaging all fronts, all of these things. The Neurolictor is of course able to capitalize on because of its infiltrate and its lone op. All right, let's check out unit number 3. Number 3 unit for scoring, and I might be crazy for this one, but today, the way I'm feeling, I'm putting Gargoyles at number 3. I love these guys, Honestly, I could probably just end this slide with me saying, I love these guys, use these guys. The only thing that is kind of troubling is Gargoyles have creeped up in price. They're 80 points now, but honestly, if you tell pretty much any army, if you're like, okay, you can get a 10-man unit that moves 12 inches, that has assault on its weapons, that after any time it shoots, it moves 6 more inches, and it's OC2, I bet you almost every single faction in the game would say, yes, I would, without a doubt, pay 80 points for Gargoyles. And, I'm the same way. And I'm doing that because I play a lot of Tyranids. But anyways, just a quick gloss over. I think Gargoyles are they're pretty straight to the point why they can score points. But you move block all day. If you watch any of our streams with me playing Tyranids, I'm move blocking my opponent with my Gargoyles just 100% of the time. It's so much that my friends are getting annoyed with Gargoyles because they move 12 at least. Oftentimes I'm advancing them. I roll 6s on my advance for Gargoyles. I don't know about you guys, but after I do that, then they can shoot again. So potentially they can move 24 inches. And the fact that they're a 10-man squad means their footprint is huge. So they're able to bottle up and move block oftentimes 2, 3, maybe 4 units and really tell your opponent, okay, I know you want to go over here, but you're not allowed to because I have stupid Gargoyles in the way, which is just fantastic. They deep strike, shoot and scoot. I think that's a pretty good tactic that has been used. Honestly, I haven't been able to get the good old deep strike, shoot and scoot on many opponents recently. Maybe people are just getting more wary of the Gargoyles, but it's a pretty easy thing to do. You deep strike and then you shoot something and you move 6, and hopefully you can move on to an objective and out OC somebody's unit. Pretty neat. Now, if you're playing against Tyranids and they have Gargoyles in the sky, please put a model on the center of the puck, or kind of outline the entire objective to make sure that the Gargoyles are having to go 9 inches away in a way where they can't touch the objective after they move 6. If you just do that, it's a very easy way to play against gargoyles. And last but not least, this is probably one of the strongest rules that gargoyles have, and it's overlooked because of all the other cool rules that they have. OC2 is an incredible thing to have on a data sheet, and just being able to only dedicate half of what your opponent needs to dedicate onto an objective point to control it is just phenomenal. And the style of play that I really like to play is like primary denial, scoring denial, and really flipping objectives and stuff like that. Gargoyles are just a phenomenal slam dunk in order to play in that strategy. Number 2 is the Lictor. And yes, in the latest MFM, it went up 5 points. It's okay. It's okay, guys. We can pay 60 points for Lictors and still be very, very happy for what they do. The name of the slide is Infiltrate is great. So my standard Tyranid list that I have been using, and I really haven't updated it yet since the MFM, is 3 Lictors. And what I do pretty much every game is I do 2 Lictors are going to start on the table, and they're going to infiltrate. They're probably going to be in one of these positions you can see with the terrain here. And they're going to do that in a way where the top Lictor, that he actually should be a little bit scooted up a little bit closer to the top edge of the board. That Lictor is really hard to get at because of the lines of sight, of course, between all of the templates, and then also the lone operative ability where your opponent's really going to have to get close in order to kill this unit. Or the middle one, that is often a first place Lictor that I do there, which does 2 things. One, it is telling your opponent, hey, look out, I got a Lictor right here. He might come get you turn 1. And it is also saying that your opponent who has any infiltrators or scouts or anything like that, they can't go within 9 inches of that Lictor, which means probably both of those top objectives are pretty covered between infiltrates or scouts. Maybe that top objective they could get onto, but it's going to make it just a little bit more difficult for them. So that's a pretty good position to place your Lictor. And then the bottom one is a very, very safe one. If I feel like I really just want to dedicate my Lictor to that bottom objective, I can do that. He can move up, which is fine. But going back to what I was saying before, I'll put 2 Lictors on the table, and let's say I do the top Lictor and the bottom Lictor right there. So if I put the top Lictor and the bottom Lictor right there, then that is allowing me to plan out containment and engage fairly easily, because I can get that both of those Lictors either just go right there, do the containment action, and probably be on the point at the same time. Or if I roll just a pretty small advance, they'll be able to score me a very early and very powerful engage on all fronts by getting those 2 far corners as well. In addition, they can also do cleanse. Lictors have OC, they can do actions, they can do them fairly well. So just throwing them out there to be able to move on to the objective to do cleanse is really, really nice. Now, this is just a little bit of a forewarning with infiltrates. I think the good rule of thumb is turn 1, don't put them on objectives, put them right off of the objective. Just in the rare case that your opponent draws overwhelming force, you don't want to give them free overwhelming force. So easy peasy, just deploy them directly off the objective and then you'll be fine. And then let's talk about it. If you're able to give your Lictor Synapse Strength 8 Lictor, it's really good. With fights first too, it's going to outclass basically any of your opponent's skirmishing units. They're not going to want to put scouts into the Lictors. The Lictors will eat the scouts easily. And they definitely don't want to put like a smaller squad that has a character attached to it, because you also have precision and you can yoink the character out of the squad and then get a CP, which is very, very cool. So fights first and strength 8 is amazing. One more thing I want to talk about with the Lictor before we move on is probably the main reason why I keep one in strategic reserves is the free rapid ingress. Rapid ingressing one of these units is very strong to counterpunch or put a little bit of pressure. I've done it a lot to put pressure on my opponent's own home objective. If they just have infiltrators, or if they just have like a scout squad like I was talking about before, or biovores, you can just rapid ingress and then threaten a charge into your opponent's deployment zone the next turn. So all of a sudden your opponent has to turn around a bunch of units to take care of the Lictor, or they just have to, live with the fact that there's going to be a Lictor crawling up their home. I mean, come on. Of course, I was not going to give you the number one unit before I shill the stream for a second. Sorry. But subscribe and score some great content with W&W. So you could be the best bug out there by scoring way more good content by subscribing to W&W. That's all you need to do. And then you'll be notified when any of these cool videos, these tactics videos come out every single week, or you'll be notified of when these streams happen. And I bet you can guess. Yep, it's Wednesday night, right around 6 Eastern Standard Time. Sometimes our schedule fluctuates just with our real lives, Sorry about that, but it does happen. But anyways, talking more about the stream, we have fun and competitive live streams every single Wednesday. We don't put bad lists on our stream, but in the same vein, we also aren't competitive in a way where it takes away from the fun of Warhammer 40k. So if you're wanting some really challenging, good games that are also kind of like the vibe of a good friend group playing good Warhammer, we're the stream for you, because honestly, that's when you boil down our content, that's what it is. We started a new thing where we have weird member goals every week. I've worn crazy different costumes, and everybody else has eaten a bunch of spicy peppers that I really don't want to do. But if you want to see that kind of content, it's pretty cool. In addition, we have some really nice giveaways that we do every other month or so. We'll send out a combat patrol to one of the people on our YouTube channel, or rather Discord. All you really need to do is just join our Discord, which is in the link below, and you can join these giveaways for free. Yep, we've got weekly tactics videos just like the one you are watching here. It is almost always NIDS, and we're really trying to push to reach 3,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you would like to help us reach that goal, we would love to have you. Now, unit number 1. Surprise, it's the Biovore. Yeah, I know in Prior Nexus, the Spore Mines can't do actions anymore. They probably should not have been able to do that anyways. That was a crazy rule, Tyranid is almost getting away with murder, being able to do that for, an entire year of the edition. But anyways, if you think about it, with scoring points, what units are for sure going to score you the most points? And if your Biovore is sitting on your home objective pretty much the entire game, in most missions, that's going to give you 20 points right there. Because you don't have to associate, you don't have to commit any other resources to your backfield objective besides that one Biovore. And every single turn, if it's a normal mission, it's just going to get 5 points because of that. Easy, And so 2nd through 5th turn, that's 20 points. Amazing. In addition to that, it scores behind and engage on all fronts. With its Spore Mines, it can move block units, because if you put it 9 inches away, let's say there's a tank, and a tank moves 10 inches, you put your Spore Mine 9 inches away, and then that tank has to stay an inch outside of that Spore Mine. Yes, I know it'll explode, but it has to finish its movement an inch outside of that Spore Mine still. So because it's 9 inches away, you're essentially cutting off 2 inches of movement off of that unit, because the Spore Mine is blocking it from moving its full 10, because it has to stay an inch away, so it's not able to move its entire distance. It denies advances, and you don't even have to be super creative about it. With that other one, with move blocking an inch away, you just put a Spore Mine there and say, hey, you can't advance because the rules say you can't. Which is just really strong. If you want to hear me go in depth, as well as some TTS examples on how to use the Biovore, check out my Biovore briefing that is on this channel. It's an entire video dedicated to the Biovore and some really cool tactics that I use for Biovore, and I go in depth and show real, I guess not real life, but real game examples of how I use this Biovore and how the best way to use it. So check it out. But last but not least, the one thing that can be kind of a debuff or whatever for your game plan is you got to be careful with Spore Mines with Purge the Foe. That's a terrible mission for Tyranids, and no prisoners. So either hide your Spore Mines on Purge the Foe, or just shoot your Biovore's gun, because it's kind of a good gun, and I've killed many things with a Biovore through my time through this edition. It just kind of happens sometimes. But cheers to the Biovore. Cheers to you for watching. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching another one of these Tyranid Tactics videos. Thank everybody for liking, commenting, and subscribing. We really appreciate the support that the channel's been getting recently. And, we're only going to be trying to give you better content for you to enjoy. So thanks for hanging out. I'll see you Wednesday.